not important. How long did I go for? It was like 4 hours, 3 hours, something like that. This always happens whenever I start talking. I just go off. But anyhow, communism can't is not possible on Earth, and all the examples of, I mean, heaven's basically a commune. The first church, or the one with the people that were speaking in tongues and had certain skills and stuff, that was a commune. And marriage is painted as a commune, as mutual subservient. You're mutually subservient. That means that they negotiate on everything. That's um, a working marriage, a good working marriage. And if you want to be a deacon in a certain kind of church, or in, I guess, all churches, if you want to be a deacon, you have to be married. And in that, what you're doing is you're implementing. If you can make it work, you're probably not going to be a deacon if your marriage fails, but you're. It says in the Bible, it says, "Where any two of you are, there I am." It's probably the reason. Um, if I'm with God, then Jesus is there. It's almost like a proof. Where any two of you are, there I am. So, and it's possible that where any two, and there I am, that means that both are Christians. So they're abiding by um, abide the things that Jesus talked about. They're trying to make it work. I can't have a relationship because I wouldn't be able to keep that going. And I consider myself to be kind of a nomadic black sheep on the edge of whatever I could call myself. I would say it. Um, I talk the stuff. I talk other stuff. I don't know how much I can believe that I'm really aligned with it. I'm I'm kind of the table trying to stand on two legs. But there was something Jesus said about, these people over here don't really follow it, but they're talking about it. He says, don't do anything. They're saying it right, even if they're not doing it. They're, you know, do as I say, don't do as I do type, approach. I'm trying, but there are areas where I just can't talk. I can't be reasonable or right or anything. But it's not going to stop me from talking. You know, that was something I was born with, is the inability to communicate. And so I had a more imperfect perception than the choices that probably interest the angels a lot more than the rest of them, because I'm going to start coming up with ideas that are so profound and outside the lines of everything, and you need those guys in order to deal with things that would just be inefficient and getting everybody else to deal with. So I'm just a guy that's not really going into vertical, but I'm going into an extreme horizontal. I'm jumping around all over the place, and I'm learning things here and there, and I'm not being very successful at any of them. But that wasn't the thing that was important in the first place. What it was, and this is what I believe it is that purpose for me to be around is to draw ideas together, and I don't even know if it's a purpose or if it's just a realization. It's a development of ideas, and it could be that I'm just being represented as an example, not a perfect example, but of a profound approach that might be a profound approach, a vulnerable, profound approach, or I might not be anything at all in that, but that I'm not giving up and that I'm pursuing, and I'm coming up with information that I believe would help. I mean, there's something to be said about somebody that's intent on maintaining peace, but is peaceful, not a fascist. Fascist is somebody that beats others down with a bat. The bat, the fasci is a binding of bats, batons, and so fascism is about keeping order by beating the fuck out of everybody. It's the reason why uh, it's such a curse word, and that's what the Nazis were. They were fascists. They got their way. They kept order by beating the fuck out of everybody, and then Romans did that. They were fascists, and Trump's kind of a fascist because he moved this guy off over into where was it, Nicaragua or someplace like that. This special prison, or I forgot what it was called. It's it's somewhere in South America. This awful prison system that nobody ever escapes. And they moved them there, I guess, to prove a point to everybody else, to say that if you contradict what I'm going to do, I'm going to send you there. And, you know, that's fascism, you know. So anything you see where somebody's beating somebody down, that's fascism. And if you see Christians doing that crap, how can they call themselves Christians? And so I used to be really aggressive and combative and stuff. To some degree, I'm still that way. And it's usually when I'm trying to do something, something gets in the way of me doing something, something's trying to prevent my free will. Um, I see that as a sin, and I point out it and I say, you're doing this. One example is AI moderation. You want to do something like I wanted to create a picture of a blancmange, which is a kind of dessert, a British or a European dessert. A blancmange was going to eat Trump in the White House, and I was using my AI imaging program to say that I would say blancmange eats Trump, and it wouldn't let me do it because the people that uh, maintained the service were intent on not really pissing off anybody, and they considered that to be something that would get them in trouble or get sued. So they made it so you couldn't say that, and it made me so mad because anything I tried, it just kept keeping me from doing it. I eventually went to Chat GPT and I said, "Is it doing this thing?" And I can't even say this. And originally, Chat GPT said, "No, I can't talk about that." And I said, "Well, I'm not really trying to attack Trump. I just want to make an image of. Actually, I didn't say it was Trump. I said I want a man. I really just need a man to be eaten by a blancmange." And then I ended up saying a man that looks like Trump, and then it let me do it. But during uh, that whole thing, I ended up sending an email message to the company and said, the sort of thing that when I was a Wavefront user and I made all this money, and then they denied me a license, and then I adopted Blender, and then I vowed for 3 years I vowed for some time I would train all the people to use Blender, um, so that I could just ruin Maya's potential of making any money. And recently, said in an interview with Blender Guru. It was like 3 or 4 years ago. It was actually before COVID, and he said he'd done a back of the envelope calculation and determined from the uh, SEC filings that um, and owns 3D Studio Max. He said he determined that there, because Maya only represented 25 million of their assets, that there could only possibly, or per year, they were making a revenue of about 25 million. He determined from that there could only possibly be 10,000 licenses of Maya out there. And everybody knows that Maya is really being sold to schools. It isn't really being used in studios. And because it's just not a very logical program. It's a piece of crap. It's I mean, private software, commercial software has a tendency, even though it might have some really good features in it, it has a tendency to be really badly designed from an interface point of view, from a streamline point of view. Um, Maya was created. I'll tell you the reason why Maya is first. And I was going to get around to it, and I just jumped off the subject and went and. This is the reason why Maya exists. In 96, Microsoft, after 95, in 95, SIGGRAPH was in Los Angeles, and they had 35,000 attendees. It was the most that had ever been to a SIGGRAPH. SIGGRAPH stands for Special Interest Group Graphics. And it was originally just a place where coders would go and compare notes and demonstrate things that they were able to do with computers in the area of computer graphics, and grow and develop better technologies and develop contacts and set up companies, and because they were all interested in the same thing. That's what a special interest group is. And they're a part of the ACM, which is the uh, organization that has to do with everything that has to do with computers and computing and stuff. Um, but in 95, they had 35,000 people. And this is because Spielberg was putting out this message after Jurassic Park that we don't really have enough animators. And there were people going around with rumors and saying, if you can even do anything with computer graphics, you've got an instant job. So everybody was just like flocking to SIGGRAPH in 95 after this, and thinking they were going to get a job as animators or in these studios or whatever. And what really happened was it was flooded, and it became not the case. In fact, I thought I was going to get a job. I thought I was going to get a job so certain that I used a portion of my savings to purchase a to get a week at the Hotel Nico on La Cienega in Los Angeles, because I wanted a really good hotel, and I didn't like Los Angeles. I knew it was going to be just this awful place or whatever. I mean, to me, Los Angeles is a crap hole. It's an armpit of America, and I don't like it at all. To me, it looks. I mean, there are places in the Dallas Fort Worth area that are much better designed than anywhere in Los Angeles. And I mean, Arlington is even a better place to live than Los Angeles, but it's a shithole. And so I wanted to make sure I was going to be in a hotel and not a shithole, and a good one. And Nico was where they filmed part of the game with Martin. Uh, uh, no, I just want to say Landau. It's not Martin Sheen. It's a different guy. Um, but it had had what's his name? Uh, Forget it. You can go and look it up. It'll hit me in the head. Um, but that movie was filmed. The first part of the movie was filmed in the Hotel Nico, which is basically this Japanese-like hotel that had these punch card keys that you could get into it. And so I thought I was going to get a job instantly. And then I came back for 96, and then I came back for 97, and then I just gave up altogether. I ended up in a dot cam and came back in 2000 just because I needed to get a release or whatever, from that. Before I went to that, I went to the Game Blender conference. My wait for that, it was $700. Before that, I'd actually sent Ton a deck alpha. It was really not a very good deck alpha, and I sent it to it, and he put Linux on it and sent it to Ton, and Ton wasn't able to get it working. And the guy really hated me in their deck alpha because he wanted to spite me. It didn't bother me at all because at least Ton got the deck alpha to work. But I had no reason to have a deck alpha. I just Deck alpha was a fairly popular machine at the time because it was a very cheap, fast computer. It was risk based. Eventually, Microsoft pulled out on the deck alpha, and the only operating system you could get for it was Linux. And what happened was Cigarette crapped and said, "Oh, went over, bought up Alias, bought up Wavefront that said Alias Wavefront, watch the sparks fly," because Alias was a computer graphics company from Toronto, and Wavefront was from California. And then there was Explorer that Wavefront had bought up, or I guess SGI bought up and merged with Waveform. And Explorer was part of Thomson Digital Image in England, and they're all competitors. Moved all these competitors together, and they're going to put together a deliverable, and it was going to be Maya. So, and that's the reason Maya exists. And guess what were the best parts of Maya? The best parts of Maya were Explorer. Explorer was the most perfect, best technology, and part of kinematics, which was just something Wavefront had made on the side and contracted out. It wasn't really Wavefront, and it really wasn't Alias. Alias sucks. You know what Alias did with their stupid software? They got to be really popular with the Terminator movie. But this is what I determined is that they would develop the application while they were making tutorials. Their tutorial writer would go to the programmers and say, "I need this feature in the program so I can finish this tutorial." It almost sounds like what they do with Blender now, but it isn't, because they don't. Um, I don't think they do that. They might be doing that. That's not the way to design a program. Better way to design a program is to have the users involved and them explaining the things they need, and then having the programmers go around and see what things they can hit, birds they can hit with a single stone, because that's going to be more efficient. But they didn't do it with Power Animator or Alias 7 or anything before, because with Alias 7, they distributed a poster that would show you how to get to all the features. It was highly modal. It had 7 levels of menu. menus, and that's the reason why they needed the posters, because the artists couldn't find out where all the functions were. It was such a loaded interface. It was worse than Blender. And people are here crapping on Blender, and having had seen Alias Power Animator and knowing what a shitty program it was, um, you know. And so what I did is I basically went to the Blender, and I kind of informed Ton on a lot of stuff that he should have in his program, and kind of made it simpler, I guess. But I kind of bombarded him with that, but I also inspired him. I said, "Oh, this is going to be really big. You just have no idea," because he didn't really have that much confidence in it initially. He was just going to release the software to the public, and he was claiming he was going to open source it. And we all got a hold of it. I mean, a number of us users got a hold of it and knew that it was fairly complex program, and could only imagine how complex the source code was. And we didn't understand the buttons because there were some of them were in Dutch, and were kind of cryptic. And after talking to him for a while, because he didn't have a manual yet, we were the only way that he could demonstrate for us what could be done with it. And of course, we're going to share it with everybody else because we want this thing to be big. And so the first bit of business is that he needed to support himself, and he came up with a budget, and he said, I need to be able to make 60,000, and I'll do that. I'll spend like 3 months on making a manual, but I need the money up front to pay for the manuals, because then I won't be able to make the manuals. And so it sounded like a great deal. He didn't really want us to just come up with money and then not have something to show for it. So by that summer, I think it was 97, he had version 1.5 manual. And I think by that time he had it on the PC. And it was a fantastic. I had never seen anything like it, because when you think of a computer manual from a freeware organization, you think of somebody like XView. I had paid for the XView manual, which is a popular image display program on the X Windows platform in the 90s. Was the way you view images, and did some basic editing of images. The manual for it was a 3-ring binder and all these copied pages. Not very impressive. The one Ton provided us with was like this dense manual that was like half an inch thick, and every single it had the cover was glossy, or was matte finish and kind of glossy, and like really, something you would probably see as a coffee table book. And then like every 20 or 30 pages that separated the various parts of the interface that he talked about, there would be this big old page, this big old LeMay golden page or a silver page. And I mean, he wanted to wow us with that manual. And it was because he was in the media, he was in the printed media industry, so he knew how to do stuff like that. Knew how to make um, quality manuals. And so he's going to make sure that it was going to be the best kind of manual. And then he discussed everything that was in the interface on that manual. I still have it, but it's all in pieces. And the front page of that manual has his signature, says, lots of love to Kiernan. And I'm sure he did that for everybody that was in the group, because that was his first interaction with people that were going to either they fell in love with the program, or in my case, determined that it was going to be a great program. I was taking the Steve Jobs approach. That is, Uh, Somebody says Steve Jobs is always going to be his hero because what he would do is that he would inspire you that you were going to do the greatest thing, and then once you believed it, he was going to make sure that you were going to do it. And that was kind of where I was at, is that this is going to be the solution, because I hate this software license crap. I hate what they did to me. I had the response that Richard Stallman had to Unix, and this is what happens for everybody that supports open source, or what's called freeware first. Open source is a secondary term. There's open source that isn't free. There's commercial open source, which is a limited set of the source that is given to sysadmins or systems programmers at big companies to determine if the kernel and things in the operating system are secure. They need it in order to be certain that the thing's not going to break down on them. Windows doesn't have anything such as that. Mac does, and Linux certainly does. It's the extreme form of that, which is all the source code. The source code is what you need in order to create the executable that runs on the machine. The source code doesn't actually run itself. There are some languages like Python where the source code is what executes. It isn't compiled. It might be compiled, but interpretive languages are usually interpretive languages because they do something that can't be compiled. Java is compiled to Java bytecode. It isn't really a compiled language. It's a tokenized language, and those tokens make it. The tokens make it so that the classes, the software libraries don't have to be they don't have to be interpreted. They don't have to be parsed every time to execute like they would with Perl or something. So it does a half compile. It goes through, it reduces all of the operations and objects and all the structures and stuff to numbers, and the numbers reference patterns of structures and things, or variables and whatnot. And it loads in the tokens, and the tokens generate the infrastructure, and the infrastructure is what executes. And so the parse stage isn't there. And I was talking about earlier about Corba and XML. XML is parsed. You might be able to compile it into something, but usually it's parsed. And because it's parsed, it's incredibly slow to bring it in. So it's not really something you want to be using as an inter-process communication, which is what Corba does. Corba compiles half of an object, and the other half interfaces with whatever language it is you pick to interface with. If it's a mainframe that is involved in the schema, you have to involve that mainframe. You wrap it with a Corba wrapper, and it make it look like an object, and you interact with the mainframe through the object's methods. And if it has any data it needs to bring out, those come out as objects, and which is just or they come out as data that's labeled as a certain kind of pattern of that's defined by a Corba source, so that's really what Corba is, and it's all really implemented on the low level with a remote procedure call, and a lot of people don't like it because it's just RPC on the bottom. But they, at the beginning, they didn't really understand what objects are all about. It's really all objects are really about is a way of thinking, is a way of organizing your code so there's maximum reusability, and it's easier to connect things together. But there are people out there that don't want things connecting together unless it's their software. And The only reason why Microsoft, I believe, supported XML and wasn't going to support something like Corba, which was much more superior and fast and didn't involve a process of parsing um, and an interpretive process or anything, was that it would be really easy to determine compliancy through Corba and XML. You could have you could support non-compliant stuff. You could determine compliancy, but how many people are going to parse and determine compliancy in all one parsing? You know, they're going to go through and parse, and they're going to determine if the data type is compliant, that that it implements all the necessary things, and it doesn't have any special sauce in it that it can't recognize. Because XML will, when it's parsed, will just the parsers will just ignore the stuff that they don't understand. They'll only look for the stuff they understand. And if there's something there that requires something else, that it will look for that other something else. But if there's something extra in there, then that's a special something. And Microsoft likes that kind of stuff because um, they can parse that object. They can put in special stuff, and then they can say it's XML, and then their clients will take it to a competitor, and their competitor will go, "Oh crap, I have to figure out what this extra stuff in there is, or else my client won't buy my software." So they have to go and check out and see what it is like in the Microsoft implementation, because Microsoft added all this extra stuff. It makes defining compliancy much more difficult, because to determine the compliancy, you have to read through the entire data file and identify all of the stuff that is foreign. And Microsoft will not invest in support anything unless they can leverage it. And so they're not going to support Corba. And the reason why is because with Corba, you can determine compliancy instantaneously. All you have to do is to look to see if the methods are implemented and then run some tests on them. And if they satisfy the test, then it's got compliancy. They could put some special stuff in there, but you could quickly determine if it was non-compliant just by testing the interface. If it came up with some really strange states in there and it started performing inadequately, then you knew that it was non-compliant and you could drop it. If enough people had problems with objects that Microsoft stuff was creating, then they could say, well, this is complete crap. It's non-standard. It isn't complying with the community standard for this set. And Microsoft wants their stuff to be the industry standard. And the way to do that is to make all the software and get everybody to use all the software, and then it becomes a standard, because there's no competitors to really be able to compete with them. That's the reason why I consider them evil, and there are a lot of other coders that consider them to be absolute evil. But what they are, they're businessmen. They're private industry with software. And when you get into private industry with software, there's a certain amount of illogical stuff you have to do, because it's survivability. It's just like setting up a trap. You have to learn to set up traps to keep yourself alive. It's a predatory scheme. And you don't want those things in operating systems. You don't want those things on the low levels. Find it if they're on the high level, where applications compete. You don't want it on the operating system level. But that's where Microsoft exists, is at the bottom. And what they do is they hold your hardware for ransom. They keep you from accessing your hardware. They keep the applications developers, or the library designers and the hardware developers and stuff, from having to learn to connect with the applications, and to keep the applications from having to learn how to connect with the hardware. That's the benefit of an operating system. That's true of all our operating systems, or it has to be true in order to be effective. Microsoft looked at that and said, when IBM propositioned them to create an operating system, these guys were not operating systems builders. They were interpreter builders. They built basic interpreters. They weren't into operating systems. Operating systems was a foreign concept, but they got into it because IBM needed an operating system. Why did IBM need an operating system? So they could destroy the home computer industry. This was revealed in a PBS video by X Kringley, the three-part series. They said the reason why IBM was getting into the home computer industry was to make it a fad, make it get all of these people that are making home computers to just kind of give up on it and for it to die away or to dominate it, because it was keeping them from selling mainframes, because people would find up solutions that they could do. I give you an example. uh, Sam's the guy, Sam Walton's wholesale business. Sam's at one point were using Commodore 64s in place of registers, which, a Commodore 64 at the time was like $300. And instead of paying like $1,000 for some NCN or M or whatever, some cash register company, you could get a Commodore 64 to do all the same stuff. And so he saved a lot of money by doing that. That was the sort of thing IBM didn't want happening with their stuff. That Commodore 64 would have been used in place of some mainframe that they could have sold somebody, and then just have a dummy terminal someplace else in their organization that would access the mainframe, and everybody would be time sharing on the mainframe. And IBM knew of two people. Well, the thing is they had to do it with microchips, and IBM, all of their knowledge base is in working with mainframe transistor based machines. They weren't familiar with chip based, the new chip based technology, microcomputers and stuff. So, and the microcomputers were not really as capable as the mainframes at that point. And so they needed engineers that could develop technologies at a microchip level, with limited memory and limited processing power, something that could be used for whatever the general public could use and would buy. And they only knew of two people were in that area, and it was the developer of CPM, and that was Gary Kildall, and the other one was Microsoft, who was developing basic interpreters. Neither the CPM, Gary Kildall's CPM was an actual operating system. Microsoft was producing basic interpreters that were acting like operating systems but weren't operating systems. Commodore 64's programming environment, its operating environment, was really a basic interpreter that would give you access to the hardware through through a poke and peek operation. Poke meant you check to see what the value is of a certain memory or to set the value of a certain memory location. Some could be set, some couldn't. And peek was finding out the value in a certain memory location. And it's a way of putting stuff into memory and executing it, and you could create an operating system out of that. But so a basic interpreter is kind of an operating system, but not really. And so IBM went up to Bill Gates, got him an interview, and says, "You got an operating system?" And said, and Bill goes over to Paul Allen and says, "We have. Do you know anybody that got an operating system?" I said, "Yeah, we can do it. Yeah, we can do it. We got an operating system. We know where to get in," or something like that. And they said, "Okay, good thing." And so Paul Allen goes to this guy who has this operating system called Quick and Dirty DOS, and which is basically CPM that was made to work on the PC platform, the 8086 processor that could access a megabyte of memory, and if you and you use 20-bit addressing, which you had to do. I know it took 808 assembly. Um, you had two 16-bit addresses, and you mask them in such a way you get a 20-bit address. So you had to have um, two memory calls because the memory was 16-bit based. 16-bit means you can only address 65,500 at a time. And so even though you've got access to a megabyte of memory, you have it in 64 kilobyte segments. And the 4 bits in the 20-bit register, or the 20-bit addressing, the four, um, so you had 16, and then you had an extra 4 bits, and that 4 bits would select one of 16 um, one of 16 segments of memory. So if you do the math, and it should be easy, 2 to the 20th, that gives you a megabyte. 2 to the 10th is a kilobyte. But you can also do it 2 to the 16th is 65,536, and you multiply that by 16, and you get 600, and then on top of that you get um, so 10 of that gets you to 600, and then the other 6 get you another 2/3 of the way. And so one gets you 600, the other one gets you another 400. There's a megabyte. So, and I even know how it's implemented, how the BIOS was implemented. And it was just a library that was called up the way PC boots. Is you turn the PC on, and it puts in the program counter, which is what determines the next area of memory that you start executing. Puts in the program counter all once, which is the end of memory. And so it goes to the end of memory to find a pointer, a 16-bit pointer that will point to, I think it points to the segment of memory that has the program in it. And in that, it will, I think it looks at the first byte, and then that has a pointer to the start of the BIOS, and that determines, and then the BIOS runs its boot. It was a boot wedge, and that sets up enough that it can start running a little bit of the operating system, and then it runs the rest of the operating system. And then you get your prompt, and the rest of MS-DOS is or the PC-DOS, which is where it started, has the functions, or the opcodes, or the programs in the machine code that will do various functions, like erase the hard drive, which was a really easy one. So when they say that somebody was talking about the Amigas and saying, oh, it was an unreliable system, and people ended up buying more reliable systems. If they bought MS-DOS and called that a reliable system, is a joke, because if somebody ran the wrong program, that would then call the interrupt 20, call up interrupt 20, and poke in, or put something in a certain operands or whatever, put it into the AX register this and the BX register this, and you run the interrupt after it, and then the interrupt goes and executes some code that then goes use what's in the registers to determine what needs to be done, which conditions need to be met in order to do certain things, and it goes and erases your hard drive. It does it without telling you, and you find out, oh, I just erased my hard drive, and it was all because I ran this program, and it's gone, and I can't bring this into court of law and sue somebody because I don't have the source, and I can't prove that it was something I did or something they did, you know. So DOS had the ability to do stuff like that, but Microsoft didn't give a damn. What is it doing now? Oh, it's overheating. The thing is over. Oh no, it would happen here, wouldn't it? That was weird. It was like you have said enough. I got the soup Nazi of the metaphysical universe. You have said enough. Yeah, I think I have said enough. I would like to do some audioing today and mix some music. But to go back to the story, Microsoft took over Softimage and ran, and Alias Wavefront thought that Microsoft would take over the entire. I mean, SGI thought that Microsoft would take over the entire industry. They merged all those packages together, and in the result of that was part of that was taking away all the licensing from all the Wavefront and Alias users and pushing. But what happened is they took all the licensing off of Wavefront and then they pushed us on Power Animator. And it was from that I determined that the guys at Alias were in charge, and the guys at Wavefront, because they're all coders, were not given, you know, any real say. They probably even fired some people. And the person that gave me my award, I think, was an Alias person. It was somebody somebody came in and originally kind of pushed me off and said, "Well, sorry, but you didn't win it." And then, like a couple weeks later, they told me that I did win it, and somebody got hired in and I guess just took the first two things off the top of the stack and gave me one of the awards. And I knew that they weren't really all that serious, but I wasn't going to tell people because the award didn't have my name on it. It just said Alias Wayfront Award, and it had some little statue. The only thing that had my name on it was the check, so I had a copy of the check. And when I went to uh, when I went to interviews, I would point that out. You see, I got a scholarship from Alias Wavefront. But after that, after I got that, and the only thing was is the animation I had at the end of it Pixar this way on a sign, and my bug would do a flip. You can find it on the internet. It's called Rise of the Thorax. It's on YouTube, and I made it on SGI. In the front part of the animation, the image was created with Deluxe Paint 3 on an Amiga, which is the only part that I felt like I had to do something with the Amiga because it was such a nice computer up to that point. And I really liked Deluxe Paint 3, and I knew how to paint in it, and I didn't know anything about Photoshop. And I still don't really know that much about Photoshop, and still rather use Deluxe Paint 3. And I don't think anybody's going to really understand that until they go back, until all these retro geeks will go back and try out Deluxe Paint 3 and then go, this paint program was the shit, you know. It does all this stuff, you know. And then they'll look at Photoshop and they'll be like, wow, Adobe really pulled the wool over our eyes, you know. Because in 300K, Dan Silva put so much crap in that paint program. It had the ability to do 3D transformations. This is way back in 87. 3D transformations on 2D textures, images. It could copy and paste any part of an image and use it as a drawing tool. Um, it could animate things based on certain parameters, and so it could draw a bunch of stamps, and it could animate it over a set of cell frames, so you could have 30 frames where it was drawing the same thing, rotating, and then it would go back on over to the first frame, and so you would have these repeating. And anybody who creates Euro demos will understand this process, because it was the way of kind of fooling their friends into thinking their Amigas could actually do more graphics stuff than they really could. And then another thing that was done with the Amigas was the wavy effects that they put into their demos, which was really them pushing the scan lines back and forth because the Amiga's CPU, the clock is synchronized to the NTSC frequency standard, which is at 3.5. That's the reason why the CPU clock for an Amiga is at 7.16 and not 8 megahertz like it is on the Mac, is because it's synced with a coprocessor, and the coprocessor is working with the Fat Agnes and the Paula chips. Paula's sound, Fat Agnes your memory chip, and then you had a Blitter, which was doing graphics operations and stuff, and all that stuff is working completely independent of the CPU, and all the CPU is doing is pushing stuff into the copper, the coprocessor. It's filling it up in a buffer, and then it's using Agnes and all this other stuff to do these. Agnes was their memory. It was I think it was the Blitter operations and all that stuff. I I don't fully know what all that stuff was doing, but I knew the memory was set, and it was called chip memory, and it could only work at the clock frequency. So it was slow whenever other things were fast. And so anyhow, a lot of the Amiga demos, the Euro demos, were doing stuff that nobody else could do on their machines, and that's the reason why in Europe it took off so well, and not in America's, is because in Europe the people over there were better coders than in America. And the reason for that is there's a lot of cold places in Europe, and there's nothing to do on a Friday night in a cold place than drink beer and what? Play around with a computer. You couldn't go down to a disco because, there really wasn't a disco unless you were in a big city. And so, and what are you going to do with your friends that are in big cities? What are you going to collect and do? Drink beer and go to discos? No, you're going to go and get your computers together and show off all your demos. And it became a real thing. It was a thing to do. It was a way to spend time and not get into trouble with drugs or other things then you could get into colleges and point out that you knew how to program Amigas. You knew the Motorola, how to program Motorola based programs, and Motorola chips were much superior to Intel's at the time because they, if you've ever looked at Motorola assembly, it's so weird. I mean, Microsoft assembly is like it just goes straight down the screen. And the mic and the Motorola stuff was like actually looked like source code, but it was also kind of cryptic. And I never learned Motorola. I learned the PC because I went to a college that saw that as more important. Actually, the instructor I uh, learned that stuff with better, was a good instructor, and had worked at the lab and had a lot of great stories. He told us stuff like things that the different ways they were trying to implement memory at the lab. Like one of them was using feedback of a sensor, a CCD sensor, and a screen, and just feeding back video the way that you've played around with cameras, and it gets that it, it feeds back video into itself, and somehow you can keep an image static just feeding back into itself. They were actually going to do that with memory, and then you got core memory, which if you've ever read up on it, it's just these little magnets that flip whenever a current comes in one way and another way. It causes the magnet to flip and store its state, because that's what memory is. It's the ability to hold a state, and the two states that were common later on were one and zero. The first computers were more analog. They're base 10. Some were base 3. You know, uh, it made sense after a while to make it base 2. The same reason I was started out on a previous live video that you would want to make triangles and not quads, is because the it's it's the most simplest representation of information. Either it's there or it's not, and from that you can get everything else. You know, you just stack it, and now you have different numbers. It's also very easy to put it onto chips, and the Moore's law effect should never have been called Moore's law. It should have been called Moore's memory law, because it really only applies to memory and addressing. Things go twice as fast every year because of the lithographic process of rendering CPUs and memory. In that lithographic process, um, it'd be really bad if this thing wasn't recording my audio. Well, the lithographic process uh, gets more dense every year. And if you could put a basic computer design onto a chip and you just want to make it go faster and you can do it with parallel processing, you just take two copies of the same processor, put them side by side, and use a more dense lithographic process each time, which is a photographic process. And that's why they talk about this is so many nanometers, and this is so many nanometers, and you get more and more dense. And that's so the thing is that you start with one processor, then you work up to two processors, then four processors, then eight processors, and then 16 processors, and it just keeps doubling. That's because of the lithographic process. The other reason is because the addressing goes up in multiples because of base 2. So that's the only stuff that goes up by order of 2. It kind of can happen with software, but not really. And so you end up, this is something I came up with, was you end up with management going, this must be the way that technology goes, that if our guys isn't coming up with something that's twice as fast or efficient this time of the year, we need to kick some guys out because obviously they're not keeping up on Moore's law. And that's the reason why you don't want to work in a company where the managers have no understanding of technology, especially electronics, because they're going to start making business decisions on things that aren't true for certain cases. And actually, Moore's law is only true for a small number of cases, and it's in the hardware realm. It has nothing to do with software. It could be made with software, but it's not necessary, and it's not a natural attribute of software. So the idea that things double in speed and storage and all that stuff is all just a natural side effect of how processors, memory, and hardware is designed to scale. And then the company, all it has to do is just replicate things and make things denser. And then at some point, they couldn't do it anymore because the um, the pathways of the electrons would come around too fast, and they would jump circuits, and so they couldn't do the parallel processing any. I mean, they couldn't do the CP the uh, they couldn't do the CISC design, complex instruction, uh, complex integrated instruction set, or whatever. It's just the ideas, or you couldn't do sequential circuits anymore. Couldn't do parallel processing. You couldn't do anything on a single layer. And then you had to do multiple layers, and then you had to do parallel, and then you had to come up with some sort of you had piping and all sorts of techniques and trying to get things to run in parallel, but you can't do it for everything. Some things that need mutual exclusion, and um, and that's the reason why the Amiga people, some people ditched the Amigas, is because it didn't have an MMU. It had nothing to manage uh, uh, areas of mutual exclusion, or to protect memory. It had no paging, which is what the PCs ended up using. which was an ingenious way of doing it because when you break down memory into little pieces, into little 4096, which is a 12-bit, your little 12-bit um, memory locations, and then you break up your entire memory into those, and you can address the memory more easily that way because you can say these little blocks here move over there, and you could have virtual memory that way. Virtual memory is some of the stuff is in your hardware, and some of it's in the CPU, some of it's in a cache outside the CPU, some of it's in the RAM, some of it's in the hard drive or in the SSD, and and to the application it looks like it's all in memory, and the memory is bigger than what your physical memory is. That's virtual memory. And when you load up your web browser after not touching it for a while and everything slows down, that's what's going on. Is there's all these page hits to the CPU. There's this page set to um, uh, what it does. It tries to look for the memory in the CPU and it isn't there. It looks in the cache and the tertiary cache and looks in the RAM and it's not there. And the reason why it goes in that progression is because it's fast to start with, time to get to stuff that's outside of that. And then eventually it has to go to the hard drive, which is like going on vacation for several months, according to the computer. It's going to take forever to get stuff out of there. And your whole machine starts gronking. If you have a hard drive or the SSD, it's all silent. It just slows down. And you're like, well, I bought this computer last week and now it's like slow as hell. It's because you don't have enough memory and most of your stuff is on your hard drive now because you haven't touched it. Haven't touched and it pushes it out the hard drive because you could have more stuff that's actively being worked on closer to the CPU. And that's what virtual memory keep a program from crashing the rest of the system. And that's the reason why a lot of people kind of ditched the Amiga and went on to the PCs and went on to OS2 and Unix and whatnot, is because those were more mature for that kind of thing, but you still couldn't do all the media things the Amigas could do on the other computers. It was more mature in different other ways. The other thing was is that if you're intent on it doing things correctly, as long as you abided by Commodore's rules for development of programs, it wouldn't crash. And what that did is that made it so that the coders had to be better coders that would be compliant, that they wouldn't guess at the interfaces that were going on behind things or going into the areas where they're supposed to leave that to Commodore. They would go into a library and say, "Oh, I know what's really being done here. So this is this and this is this," and they write their program for it. And it's completely dependent upon um, something they learned of that library, and then the guy that with the line, their consumers go over and try to use their program, and it crashes because that guy was building their application with the idea of what was going on in the and that this problem is much more rampant, and it's because Microsoft's uh, de- way of dealing with business is that they're always changing shit whether it's need change or not. And so they permit the developers or they permit the companies to install applications with older libraries of like C++, Visual C++ libraries and whatnot. And so whenever there is something that needs to be updated, but the application designer based it on that old library, then and because it's a commercial system that everybody's going to be using different versions of the libraries, you, you end up having security holes and what they call fragmentation, but security holes in every single application inside of the operating system. And because nothing's shared, nobody's sharing a common set of libraries that their applications depend upon. And on Linux, it's a requirement uh, in certain, depending, I guess, on the level of uh, of privatization of the software, but it's kind of a big no-no to take a open source freeware library and use it internal to your package apart from the operating system. That you're just bypassing the library that's in the operating system to use the one that your application worked better with. And if you do it that way, then there's going to be a lot of bugs like there is on Windows. And the only way to fix it is to fix your code to work with the newest version of the library. And sometimes the newest version of the library is the thing that's at fault, and everybody ends up using the older version of the library. But at least they're trying to make it work better by having a lot of reusing old libraries, or reusing the libraries that are current, okay? Or the library that's current, and there is no other that's being used. And, you know, because if you change it in there, if there's a security hole and it's in that library, it changes in one place and it just ripples through everything else. In Windows, that doesn't happen because, and it may happen now. I'm pretty I'm pretty sure it doesn't. I mean, I'm pretty sure it is the case that it still works that way. And even worse, you get a lot of your applications from places other than a single store. Microsoft has a single store. Apple iPads and iPhones and the Macs, they have a store, by an app store by which you get your applications. But there are people who will jailbreak a phone so that they can sideload stuff, or people will get they'll get the Android phones so they can sideload stuff. And that side loading is a way of getting viruses. If you don't sideload, if you go through an app store where things are being vetted and being tracked and made sure, there's a process by which applications are accepted or not based upon if there is stuff in the application that's accessing stuff it shouldn't be able to access, that is a security flaw, then it never makes its way into the app store. And there are some people that would like to have that stuff, and so they're willing to bypass that and risk the chance of getting something that works poorly, or actually sacrifices their. And then we get all these reports from the news that so and such broke in to some system, and a lot of the coders are saying, "I bet a million that was a Microsoft system they broke into," because Microsoft's security is by obscurity. Nobody knows how their operating system works because it's not open source. There's no way of determining it as a developer or whatever. And then I told you about XML. They're supportive of that so that they can remain non-compliant, and so they can veer everybody onto their platform by use of special sauce inside of their XML formats. And then they make it really slow, which probably is the reason why all of the manufacturers love them, because it forces people to get faster processors to deal with all the gunk that's in the operating system that's making it inefficient, such as the XML that it has to parse. And when they could have used either Corba or something more efficient, Java's not. So it would be something that would be tighter coupled and a compiled language, and have the benefits of Java without the inefficiencies of Java, which is the inheritance searches. My brother works with C on think. He prefers to work with C because he knows how to do object oriented programming with C, and so he can make efficient code without the slowdown of the Java. And I mean, it doesn't make any sense. He's got a PhD in computer science. Why, why put up with something that's less whenever you can write your own? And so that's what he does. And he uses BSD because it's Unix and Linux isn't. And he, when his, when the people he worked for wouldn't give him a parallel computer, but they'd give him some money, he'd figure out for 100,000 I could make a 25 node parallel hypercube just using fiber optic cards and and these Xeon motherboards and stuff. I could just put them in a big old rack mount, and there I got a parallel computer that my organization wouldn't give me because they don't really give a shit about us researchers. And I'm not even going to talk about the company, but the thing that's really funny is if you go and you look at their staff, everybody's got a frown on their face, and my brother's the only one smiling because he's not being affected by the same shit they are. Is because they they don't know how to survive. They don't know how to survive in that company. And I know my brother, and I know him to be. He's a positive person, but it's not so much optimism. It's that he knows the pitfalls and he knows where things fall off, and he can get around them. If the organization doesn't give him the resources, he'll find a way to do it. And that's a real engineer right there, a real good coder, a good engineer. He doesn't even code anymore. He's kind of a leader, a team leader type guy. Because at my age and at his age, certainly there's no way you're going to be coding. And he works with AI. He does some coding. But he says sometimes he'll be coding something and then he'll ask the AI to finish it off. And so, anyhow, so Softimage, Microsoft bought up Softimage, and the shit hit the fan, and SGI bought up all those packages and was going to create Maya, and then Microsoft determined that the return on investment of having something in the 3D computer graphics industry wasn't all that important and ditched it, and then determined where the real money was had was in having hardware that could do it, and they pursued making better graphics. What they did is they took OpenGL and they made their own. They called it DirectX, and and then they kind of schmoozed with. They kind of seduced SGI into the idea that they would help them put graphics cards that could do the stuff of the SGI within inside of the Windows operating system. I had a friend that had bought an SGI and he was crying to me and he says, SGI is prostituting themselves to Microsoft. And the reason why he was saying that is because he had bought a O2, or he had bought an O2 for like $8,000, and now is going to be worthless once the PCs were able to do hardware graphics and stuff. And yeah, sure enough, and then Cray just fell away, or SGI fell away, or I don't know how that worked out. But they don't. I don't know if they even exist anymore. I don't think they do. But that couldn't continue because SGI didn't really have. They were wire wrapping stuff at some point, and then they were able to create their own circuit boards and stuff, and their computers just were insane and inefficient, and they were unique in what they did. There wasn't anybody else doing it. And Blue Moon Rendering Toolkit, uh, BMRT. The guy that was developing that was sued by Pixar, or was going to get sued, and then Nvidia came in and saved the day, took him in, and then had him research a way to put shaders like RenderMans in realistic, artistically realistic games. And it's the reason why all that stuff inside of your video games today is because of that guy who was working on a freeware alternative to RenderMan that had ray tracing in it. And Pixar didn't like it because it was killing their RenderMan sales. And I somewhere on some piece of hardware or whatever, or hard drive, I've got BMRT sitting um, for the PC. I kept it. They said delete this software because it's against the copyright law and RenderMan. I kept it. Because I thought it was cool. I didn't do anything with it, but I thought it was cool that this guy did that. But that's what happened, and the rest of the story. Blender's just this package that you can't sneeze at anymore. You can't poo poo it anymore. There are people that still poo poo it, but and now it's even worse because we got AI video, and there's like really no reason to make 3D models anymore. You can ask the AI to do it for you. And it's like, what's going to happen now? There's no telling. The only thing I can imagine is that people are going to start integrating AI with applications and hope that there's some sort of crossover with the two. Um, Somebody said, if you write a book, I'll buy it. And I say, well, I don't even read books because they put me to sleep. And I kind of know that books won't sell because I know people that sell books and they don't make money. I know several people have done that in the past. And I mean, one of the methods of being a good stock and a good investor is to look around you, and if you don't see the stuff that's supposed to be making money around you, then it's kind of a sign that it isn't making money. So if I don't see books around, this thing going? Oh, it's now it's going. Hey, bro. Anyhow, yeah. So that's the thing. That's it. And this all started with me talking about the various levels of communication. And I'm sure a lot of this flew over other people's heads, but you know, um, been around for a while, and you pick up stuff along the way. Everybody's got their story to tell. And somebody said, if you write a book, I'll buy it. And I'm like thinking to myself, I've got a trust that pays for my living expenses. Why would I write a book? I don't need more money. I've got enough. I know what happens when you have more money. I've seen people that win the lottery, and then you end up being all your friends and your neighbors and whatnot start evaluating the relationship you have with you on how much time or money you're spending with them. And then pretty soon you're lonely because you can't trust anybody because everybody's being driven to you because you have money. And so the only thing to do then is hide in a secure location and away from the world, or go to another country and live in a secure, you know, so that a highly inaccessible place where it's a lot easier to maintain security. And you know, oh, it's it's the pathway to another hell. And I mean, that's really what kind of kills people when you hear people committing suicide with drugs and stuff is when you become popular, you become a celebrity, you need security to protect your life. You need money in order to pay for security, and then to get the kind of to get the experience of being an individual, and not being chased by stalkers and paparazzi and people that want your money and psychopaths that are going to befriend you and try to separate you from your money, um, and whatnot. Uh, and people that are going to call you thinking they can get money out of you and pretending that they have some relationship with you and pretending that you fathered a child and because you had sex with this person, even though you don't have sex with anyone. And in my case, I don't, and because I don't do very well in relationships, and I kind of proven that to myself. There's no point in having relationships, and I understand what marriage is that it's a good marriage is one where you've been able to maintain the concept of heaven on earth, and if there is no compliancy to the policy, then it's not possible to have a marriage in that way unless one person is willing to give up their freedoms in order to have a lifestyle that's going to be maintained by the other. I mean, marriages can work, but they're usually bad if they're not if they're not negotiating things. And there are people who say, "Oh, my marriage works fine. I got my mistress and I got my wife." And yeah, well, that's a perspective of somebody that's flawed. Um, they say, "Oh no, you're flawed," and that's a worldview there. I've got a worldview, you've got a worldview. Your worldview, in terms of my worldview, is flawed. I'm not going to try to tell you what you need to do, but in terms of my worldview, I'm not going to try to do anything because I can see what I believe to be the right way of having those relationships, and I don't want to get involved in it because I've had people tell me that it's not worth it to get married. Even in the Bible, it actually says it's better to be alone than to be married. The only reason why you would get married is to avoid sluttery, being a slut, and going around and having sex with people that are in relationships. Actually, porn stars really hate it if they end up in a relationship with somebody that's married because some of them actually have empathy, and if they end up and are, oh, actually, it's even worse than that. Porn star, and the reason why I know about porn stars and people who are like, oh, you just said you were a Christian. I said, no, I'm kind of on the edge of Christianity. I got open transgressions, and one of them is that I'm addicted to porn. So I know a bit about the porn industry. And I was listening to somebody the other day, and it kind of interests me a way on one end of things, and how it all started is, when you're a kid, you hit puberty, and then you're just kind of like looking for the stuff, and then it becomes a source of, and I never expected the internet just to have porn all over it. Now it's inescapable. You know, it's like the worst drug. It's worse than alcohol. And then I just came to the realization that it's probably not as bad as it's painted to be in the Bible because it, Jesus didn't say porn. It said if you lusted after somebody, it was a sign of adultery. What the whole point there, I believe, is that there's nothing wrong with masturbation in the Bible. There's nothing wrong. I talked to many, but there's nothing wrong with masturbation. It's the source of the masturbation. And I said, no, you can't do that. And so it's possible to get perverted with that stuff, but this is just the path I'm going. Other people go down other paths, but you can't live by a law. And you can't go around saying you're doing it the wrong way, and that really bugs me no end whenever I hear somebody, "Oh, you're doing it the wrong way," and I said, "Well, how do you know that you're not doing it the wrong way?" You know, says, "Oh, I'm doing it the right way. You're all wrong. You're all gay, and the gays are wrong, and they don't want you." they dwell on something because they're uncomfortable with something, and they want some proof of, they want something to say that they're in the right. And that's kind of the downfall of sharing any kind of belief system with anybody, is when somebody dwells on something to the point of turning it into a law, and then it becomes a theocracy. So I talked about those earlier. So anyhow, the thing that really freaked me out one day was, there's this girl. Her name is like Selena Bentz or something. I really like her. She's really nice looking and everything. She's got this thing with her eyebrows where she's got them going up like this, and it's really attractive. But I was watching an interview with her, and there was this other porn star, and he was there, and she says, "Oh, I have sex with all my friends." And the guy was like, "Oh, yeah, yeah." Oh, and says, "Oh, I would have sex with citizens." And the guy's going, "Oh, you're having sex with citizens?" And then I learned that um, porn stars don't have sex with anybody else but porn stars, because they're all going off and having HIV tests, because none of them you don't want viruses going around or STDs going around in the porn industry. And then you see these ladies making porn in VR with a what they call a plastic dummy, a plastic guy, and that's either to protect themselves, or that they can't possibly have sex with anybody because they've got STDs now, because they got in trouble, and they performed the sluttery. I'm not a slut. It's my belief that it's the sluts that show off their dick, put pictures of their dicks on services because they're wanting to go and have sex with someone. And it's my belief that sluttery is a result of social pressure. It's like, I can't masturbate. I would rather do it with somebody else. And I've tried that, and to me, it's overrated. I'm sure it probably, but I'm in an extreme case, and I don't do drugs. I got that one drug, and I don't have any reason to prove that I'm right or wrong or anything like that, because this is all fucked up. And everybody has limited perception, and nobody's perfect. And if you have limited perception, forgiveness is a given. You know, you have to forgive other people if they have limited perception, because they don't have the capacity to be perfect. Limited perception means I can only use my eyes, my nose, my ears. I can only feel things on my skin, but anything that I can't really, I'm not aware of. There are all sorts of things that I'm not aware of. I can never be aware of. I can only make assumptions about them, and because of those assumptions, you make an ass out of you and me, is what my history teacher would say. But coders have to make assumptions to some degree, because there's things you don't know that's going on inside of the computer, and you need to kind of do tests and stuff, because you can't really code at a very deep level in it. So anyhow, this porn star was just sitting there making this realization: I want to stay as far away from you as possible, because you're going to get STDs, which is what was going through his mind. But she was just kind of like, "Oh yeah, I just have sex with everybody." I find out that it can really develop kind of a really deep understanding of, and though it's kind of really strange that I kind of rely on these people that are putting their lives at risk for a source of stimulation. And God can't fault me for this, because God designed this whole system. And because I developed this belief, it's my belief that, I mean, I present my case, and that's my case is that we were designed imperfect and deserve forgiveness, and there are things that, you know, because of certain limited abilities we have, we're all a special case, and it is in our position to determine who's right and who's wrong because we're all imperfect. We're all have imperfect perception. If we had absolute perception, then communism would work. Because communism will only work if you have either absolute trust or absolute perception. If you have absolute trust, then or absolute faith, which is even greater than trust. Faith is like I believe that you're not going to wrong me. Trust is I trust that you're. I guess that's the strong one. Trust is that I trust that you're not. It's like I've proven to some extent that I believe that you're not going to. Um, but how communism has been implemented in the past, or communes fail, is that um, someone decides to do something and goes against the policy. If you implement communism in any kind of country, the first order of business is okay, anybody doesn't abide by this policy, you're dead, or we're going to drive you out of the country because this thing can't work if you won't abide by the policy. And the policy is that, this, and this, and then this commune's going to, everybody's going to treat each other the same way and going to serve certain purposes and purposes and work to the benefit of the collective people. And I'm sure the Catholic organizations probably tried to do that initially and then found out they couldn't, and then became this big old hierarchy. If you got hierarchies, that's proof that you have imperfect perception because you have to delegate responsibility to somebody else because you don't have enough eyes to make sure people are doing the right thing. And it gets worse the higher the hierarchy gets because people at the top are going to be disconnected from the people at the bottom. And if they don't have any intent to go figure out what's going on in the bottom of things, then all sorts of dumb shit can happen on the bottom. That U.S. aid thing that was being dismantled was probably being dismantled because of what happened with the EU when money was being thrown into like Africa and the guys were going around and saying, hey, I have a truck, and then picking up prostitutes, and it kept the AIDS epidemic going because they were having unprotected sex with all these prostitutes, and they were representing the United Nations. It was the UN. And it sounds like that same sort of shit's happening with USAID. There's a documentary that talks about, I forgot what the name of the documentary is, but the reality is that when we think we're doing great things um, to other countries, it's really kind of like we're the top of some hierarchy, and the benefactors are at the bottom, and we're not willing to figure out what those benefactors are, what their livelihood is like, or where the money's going. And as a result of that, or that lack of of really good management, the money ends up going places it shouldn't. And that seems to be the case now. And that's probably something that Trump got and said, I don't know how to deal with this shit. And so, how do you deal with an organization you don't know shit about that's taking up a lot of money? You fire everybody off and then you hire them back. But when he fired everybody off, then all the Democrats and whatnot and Republicans that thought he was going to go for authoritarian rule and all this stuff start screaming bloody murder, that he's like ruining what he's really trying to do is he's trying to eliminate this debt. Our money's backed by debt. It means that we owe the world. And if you owe the world, then the world comes in and owns you. And we don't want to be owned. We want to be independent, right? We want to be free and independent. And so he's doing all these things that make absolute sense, but he's giving all the craziest explanations of why. And it's because the people that voted him in don't really have, they're people that have not, in all seriousness, have not finished junior high or high school, or haven't had any higher education because they didn't have the money to pursue it. So you can't give them ideas that are too complex. They just won't be able to follow it. So he gives them these ideas that sound good on the surface, but are really just to satisfy them whenever other people are going to understand something else about him. And then the media is just so eager to find fault with him because he's done other stupid stuff and he's been hard to rely on. But as I said, we don't have absolute perception. And because of that, you have to kind of benefit him some amount of forgiveness. Even if you think that he's insane because he's saying a lot of stupid stuff, maybe he's saying the stupid stuff so that those people that are so eager to find fault in him will come out and spar at him, and he'll say, okay, this guy's out, that guy's out, that guy's out. And eventually you're going to get a group that will at least give you the benefit of the doubt and let you execute things. That's probably the reason why he brought in Elon Musk. It wasn't that Elon Musk was a really good guy. It was that he's a psychopath, if he is, or a sociopath. He's just somebody that's driven by money, just like Trump is to some extent. But he knows he'll execute. He'll execute plan and he'll carry it out. Is what Trump assumed. Is that okay? We're going to have to fire off all these agencies and then bring people back, out after firing them to determine. It's kind of like testing a house by fire. Um, you're going to have to set the house on fire to see what parts of it are really important to that house remaining solid. And so it's like anything where you have to do that sort of thing. People work with pots or glass or stuff and deal with impurities. They have to do things like that. So there's a purpose to it, and that is to get rid of the impurities. And the impurities that we have in our government are who knows where. And how did they get there? Why are they there in the first place? Because of the revolving door. Officials coming in to get special ties to do the networking, like MBAs, like any MBA of any Ivy League college really goes there not to get to get educated, but to develop relationships. That's the pinnacle of it, is to develop relationships with people who are also on the up and up. And when you go out, then you're going to be like, okay, where do I get a job? Oh, I know about this guy over here, and I can get a job over there. I can try this guy over here. And then when you get hired there, then you end up in some other organization when they're looking for work. You have to offer it to them. You're patting each other on the back, and that's how business works. And so, but you get these guys, and they go through our government, and they're not going to pander to the people's whims or to what people want things done. They're going to pander to nobody. They're going to do these. They're going to do the minimal amount of stuff. Try to manipulate the people that are around them in the government. Develop relationships with them. Find the guys who are also in the same position as them. The plan of coming back as lobbyists, being paid 8 times as much. That's what happens. The solution to it is to prevent anybody getting out of the government from ever coming back to it after 7 years. 7 years is a nice, good amount of time. And then after 7 years, this guy's lost most of his contacts because they are out of the office, and it'll make them less attractive to the companies because they haven't been in office for like 7 years. They're no longer on the up and up in the inside of the organization. They might be inside their company on the up and up, but they're going to take a lesser position. They're going to be paid less money. So the idea is to get a job working in the government, developing connections as much as you can, and then when you get out, come back as a lobbyist being paid 8 times as much by the companies that want to push laws through that don't pander to the people. And that's the reason why our democracy doesn't work. Tweedism, the rich nominate the people we vote for, and the revolving door. And this is Lawrence Lessig that taught me this. He's had several talks. He's been saying it for decades. Um, because these two things, it's until we deal with these two things, we don't have democracy in this country. And then there are other problems like the fact that our money's backed by debt. And tell that to somebody who's not quite a middle class worker. They're kind of on the lower middle class. Somebody that hasn't gone to college or something. You tell them our money's backed by debt, and they're like, "What does that mean?" We don't have a Fort Knox of money that's no longer there. That's already been spent up. We are now working off of air. We're floating. We're floating on bonds that people bought with the um uh, with or the people represents the debt that's going to be paid back at some time in the future. And this happens every time we need money. They float these bonds and sell them to somebody, and they are the ones who hold the capital that backs the currency that we trade. And the currency only has value if they're benefited, if they get if the bonds are worthless, then our currency is worthless, and then our value in the world is worthless, unless we hook on to something else that um, can retain the value can that people will trade. And that's the situation. That's the concern. And there are some people that believe that if you just keep printing the money, somewhere along the way people will be able to pay it off. And so the thing is that if we don't pay it off, then we owe our country is essentially owned by the people that bought the bonds. I think that's, whether they can do it legally or not, I don't know. And it probably ultimately it depends upon how good your military is, how easy it is for you to protect yourself. But it probably is why the military will get so big, is because we'll have to protect ourselves when the people really want their money back. They paid for those bonds and we don't have anything to provide for it. And so we're just we're running on fumes, we're not running on gas, we're running on fumes. And this can't continue. And, you know, it doesn't mean that things are going to fail in such a way that there's no tomorrow. Can't think that way. There's Everybody has in them the empathy, and that empathy is the way it works is it helps us to understand that we're all alike and that we all have needs. And if somebody's dying, we can't let them die. We have to find, because they're like us. We identify with them. The problem with racism is that and that stuff can develop if there's a need for survival and people don't trust people of a certain attribute, then racism will develop and it'll actually be engineered in such a way as to separate and create divisions. And it's almost like the strongest will survive, or whichever race is, you know I don't know if it's not good, but it may be a survival tactic at some level, and you just don't want it to happen. You know, it probably happens as a result of not being able to form a perfect union. You end up having all these small groups that can only trust the people in their group, but they can't trust anybody on the outside. And they survive and they war, and that's the reason why wars are, is because um is you know to keep wars from happening, you can't have any, um you've got to see eye to eye. You've got to have some sort of moral morality, and Christianity is pretty good for that. Whenever you're in dire straits, whenever you're in a real bad situation, dire straits means that you're in between a rock and a hard place. You're in a situation that's like we are now. And if you don't have any kind of club or union or something that can keep people alive like that, you know, then you're on your own. And then it's just, yeah, and you hope it doesn't go that way. But the empathy is the ultimate part of all of that can really help us at some point. But but if you don't have any morality, if you don't have any system of understanding about things, if you don't have any education, and you can't really have, you could have morality, but it would be very basic morality, and it you need a help from someplace in order for that stuff to work. So the thing is that, and I came to the realization the other day that Christianity is designed to work in a lot of different situations, and uh, it's been said that kingdoms rise and kingdoms fall. And there's a point at which, if it's happened in the past, it's going to happen in the future. There's going to be a point at which things are going to change, and you need something in place to keep people from stressing out and turning to thievery and all sorts of other stuff that seems like a solution, but then ends up being a quick way um, towards death. And a lot of the stuff that was in the Bible was to avoid stress and death, avoid getting into situations with people. I mean, if you're looking at a woman in lust, you're literally looking at a woman in lust. You're a peeping Tom. Her brother finds out that you're looking at her through binoculars in a tree, or whatever, or you're stalking her. He's going to come out and kill you. If her husband finds out, he's going to come out and kill you. And if her husband can't defend himself, he'll find somebody to come out and kill you. and and that's the danger of lusting after somebody. But if both of you fall in lust and it's a situation where some where something can be solved there, it's best to get solved before somebody ends up killing somebody else, and that is to get involved in a marriage, to get married. And then hopefully that stops. Because if you get involved with uh, the mistress of some lover and that lover finds out that you're the other lover, and that guy's a psychopath, you're dead. And then that ends your family is now broken up. Your children end up in foster care. Your wife goes crazy. You know, that's all a result of stress, not being able to know how to deal with situations. And that they those situations, they're all different states of being, states of living and surviving. And we'll go through, I mean, we've been through a part of America in the 80s when things were pretty dire and scary because of the World War III, um, uh, the thought that Russia was going to bomb us, and we had to protect ourselves. And then there were a lot of people that didn't want atomic bombs. I was born in the town where the atomic bomb was made, not dropped. Los Alamos is where it was made. It was dropped in White Sands. And uh, to be effective, an atomic bomb has to blow up like 100 feet above the surface. That's the reason why they put the reactor on a platform. They didn't drop the reactor; they put it on a platform because that's where the bombs would blow up. That's the maximum yield. That's such that the rays don't get absorbed. The radiation doesn't get absorbed by the ground. The radiation ends up bouncing off the ground and causing a chain reaction that gives you the greatest yield for the amount of fuel you got. And and where the thing blew up, there's this glass all over the ground that is a result of all the sand having been molten from the radiation. And so anyhow, in Los Alamos is, if you ever see the movie Fat Man and Little Boy, it really looks like that. They did a really good job of filming that in a different place. It was in California, but they found a place that looked pretty much like Los Alamos, and they filmed it there. And there, you can film in Los Alamos, but not at the lab. You can film at Fuller Lodge. So if you ever go see the Milagro Beanfield War and the governor's house where uh, Melanie Griffiths is hanging out, and they had it, and they're planning to do something about that little town of Milagro, and the people that are protesting whatnot. That mansion that he's staying in is Fuller Lodge. That's where the scientists built. Where they didn't build, they theorized about how to do. That's where all the guys like Oppenheimer and whatnot hanged out, was there. And the reason why they were there in the first place was because Oppenheimer knew this was the kind of environment that scientists would want to um, be in, to be less stressed and be able to work on this project, which would be more stressful other places if anybody knew. They wanted to go someplace where the spies wouldn't be looking for them, and they wanted to be effective. So I'm trying to retrace my steps here. How did I get here? Okay, I was talking about SGI and I talking about them prostituting themselves out to Microsoft, and then yeah, and then Nvidia started making shaders and that. But the thing is that I ended up learning Blender, and ended up really pushing Blender. And somehow my name just kind of disappeared from all the records about all the things that I did with Ton in the Blender group. So there's nothing really there, and I don't really care so much because it's now like way bigger than me or him or anybody. Um, and the further along it goes, the less and less I know how to do things in it. There's still some keys that work. Um, the first time I tried Maya, it disgusted me so much because it was so hard to follow, figure out how to do things. And I was so pissed that I couldn't buy Wavefront. These days I wouldn't buy it if you gave it to me because, well, we got Blender, but the other thing is that I I don't value myself anymore by how much computer graphics I know. It's just a time in my life whenever I wasn't really sure of how I would survive, and I just wanted to see if I could have some control over my life and get into something that I really liked, and that was computer graphics. I wanted to get into doing the sort of stuff that they did in the Tron movie, and even the guys that ended up wanting to be in that stuff aren't in it anymore. The guy that I was talking about, who worked on Dollhead and Toy Story, he doesn't work at Pixar anymore. He works he's like a teacher at Washington University now, and so I don't have any interest in getting it into anything in the tech industry because I was talking about Moore's law and the potential that a manager might might use understanding of, or the misunderstanding of Moore's law to um, to judge how fast projects should be going. And you know and if managers are don't have any intent, or the managers or the administrators of a tech company don't have any intent to understand what they're working with, because the MBAs, the way they think about things is about how much of a return on investment they can make, and all the learning is no longer about how to make companies. At least that was the idea I brought away with the friend that was kind of in apprenticeship with me, was a guy named Vincent Ye. He was a lawyer. He also had a computer science degree, and we'd have talks about this stuff. But he said really that the MBAs are, the big thing is the connections and what they can put on their resume. And there was a lot of effort at the time to apply the hype and everything about object-oriented programming to business. They're trying to turn people into objects and trying to see how they could make business more efficient by manipulating the organization into getting the most return on the people they hired or whatever, maximizing the yield of those people they hired on. And I was seeing some of those articles and those books and stuff, and you could almost see what was coming next. Um, but if you're a computer programmer, if you're an engineer, and you're in a company, and that company's treating you like shit, and they're having you come in and save them from certain doom in the business, and they're not willing to use the right software or hardware, you could leave. Get out of there, go someplace else. Because those guys are doing a disservice to the company by not becoming more understanding of the product. If they're not intent on knowing what the products do, and not wanting to learn, and not wanting to, and not giving people enough room, and giving time to sleep, and you know giving them vacation enough to go off and think about something, being under no real pressure, and not, what they call back and you say, "You sure it's okay for me be on vacation?" No, go ahead, take vacation. We want you to have time off. Those are the good companies. The ones that are the bad companies are ones that are like, no, it's survival of the fittest. It's dog eat dog world out there. We need to do this, and your survival's depending upon it. I mean, if you don't come in for work tomorrow, you may not have a job here, and that kind of thinking is the sign of something that's about to fail, and that's where you want to leave, unless there's like unless it's some brand new technology that and even then, there's no telling if it's all that important. Because I mean, people are always wanting to be there on the bottom floor when the thing starts to get big, so they can buy the stock and make tons of money. But it if that's the effort and it isn't well controlled, then they're not going to be there for the rest of the time. And where's your business plan? What was the policy? What was this thing going to become? What kind of plant is this thing going to be, or animal, you know, in the end? And I had heard MBAs are not Masters of Business Administration. MBAs are not usually very good at, some of the guys get their start doing this, but there are people that'll get MBAs that weren't naturally entrepreneurial. They weren't naturally business people. They didn't start a lemonade stand or anything like that. And or they weren't engineers that started a company after developing some fantastic thing. Their MBAs, they'll go into a company and all they know how to do is grow stuff based upon principles that are given to them in school. But their intent is, what? Is it to create better products? Is it to really learn about the products and try to maximize the utility for the consumer? Well, it can't really be, because the incorporation says you have a fiduciary responsibility to your creditors to make money. So you can't do anything for charity, and you certainly can't do anything for your consumers if it's going to lose the creditors' money. We got shit going on in this country that is just doomed to failure because it's it's gone on wrong long enough and it can't be undone. And and the rest of the world has looked at us as good examples as a good example of how to do things, and we're not. But at the end of it, you got to say to yourself, kind of like that movie Risky Business, what the fuck? Just continue on with it. Don't take in the stress of what's going on. Try to eliminate the stress. Go out and take a walk, do something, play a board game, experience some good comedy, masturbate, something to get rid of the stress, and don't take it in as like, oh, I'm a flawed person because I'm a cuck, or whatever. I only learned of what a cuck meant. It sounds like that means a husband who will let his wife like have sex with anyone and won't protect her, or protect, or get out of that situation, or it to me it really sounds like a bad term to use as something. It's a bad word that really should be put to death, because in some cases you really do need somebody who's going to serve the greater good of the public. And if somebody's using the word cuck, they're certainly not going to understand anything about socialism or the need to try to, as Jesus would say, do for those who cannot do for themselves. you know. And that's the reason why when Republicans deal with anything having to do with socialism, they say, "Oh, the churches will take care of it." What church? I mean, the churches have pissed off enough of the people in the country and in the world that they're having problems putting shit together, getting people together, believing in the stuff that was the foundation of the church at one time or whatever. The things Jesus talked about, and because Jesus' name has been thrown around enough, some people won't even read a document if it's got Jesus in it, you know. And the reason why is because of all the people that didn't bother to try to at least figure something out about it. But I think the best way out of this for the Christians is to do what Jesus did, was avoid being involved in politics. Get out of politics. Get away from trying to make law out of anything that you're believing in, because that's going to piss people off, and then they're not going to really want to have anything to do with you. It isn't because you're providing truth, it's because you're pissing people off by trying to be like the Pharisees. You're doing all the necessary things to be part of the clique. You're wearing the shirts, you're wearing the crosses, which is the best form of torture by the Roman government, was the use of the cross. I mean, you don't need a cross in order to remember Jesus. And why would you wear a cross? It's like saying I'm a part of the clique. You know, it's an idol before God. Even the picture of Jesus is an idol before God, because now somebody can come in and look like Jesus, and it gives you false trust in it, because